Hello, and welcome to another live chapter reading of Rock Me to the Top by Victoria Zack, as brought to you by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. The meeting room at Clefttonic Records went silent. The breathtaking news surged through Joe, forming a lump in his throat that left him speechless. It was finally happening. 7 years of hustling the rock scene, gigging from city to city, and paying his dues had finally paid off. Gracefall had landed their first major headlining world tour. This punk kid's dream was now becoming a reality. Joe scrubbed a hand on his face. Headliners. He glanced at his younger brother, Dylan, who was sitting across the table, his face beaming with enthusiasm. Little bro mouthed, "Holy shit, dude." Joe's heart pounded in double time as Moxley, their guitar player, shot him the same stunned expression. Big Rick, the president of Clefttonic Records, was on the other end of the conference call, going on about details of the tour, but Joe couldn't hear him over his thundering heartbeat. Excitement brewed. Headliners! The word looped inside his brain, a beautiful song he'd never get tired of hearing. "Davidson," Rick barked through the cell phone, placed in the middle of the office table. "Make sure you have your boys on the bus by the end of the week." He inhaled deeply, then exhaled as though he'd taken a long drag from his celebratory cigar. "We need to strike while the iron's hot." Davidson, their band manager, cleared his throat as he, too, was experiencing the excitement pulsing in the air. "Yes, sir, that won't be a problem." "Horns up, boys," Rick's raspy voice rang out loud and clear. "Welcome to the big time." The call ended, and the room came alive. Moxley shot out of his chair like a cannon and made a beeline straight to Joe. They met in the middle, in a firm hug. "We finally did it, bro." Mox pounded his fist against Joe's back, overjoyed. On the outside, Joe played it cool, as usual. As the only two members of Gracefall, with their heads screwed on halfway straight, he and Moxley kept themselves on lockdown around the rest of the crew. Most of the time, they succeeded. Good old Steady Joe, the glue that held Gracefall together throughout the years. That side of him was all the crew saw as he slapped Mox on the back. But on the inside, he was stoked. Financially, this couldn't have happened at a better time. Moxley's wife was due with their first child. Tyler could finally afford his extravagant bass guitar collection without maxing out credit cards. And Dylan, now watery-eyed, and shooting him a smile over Tyler's shoulder, would never have to return to their childhood home. In 2 big strides, the brothers met with a shoulder bump. Overwhelmed with emotions, Joe pulled him into a tight hug. Together they had formed a band, played gigs every night since high school, felt the grit of being on the road. Giving up had never been an option. Their dream was coming true. "We did it." Dylan squeezed him harder. Joe's chest tightened as tears stung his eyes. Fuck. Clearing his throat, he stepped back and nonchalantly wiped his face with the back of his hand. This was much more than just making it to the top. He had removed Dylan and himself from the trailer park, and from Karen, the demon bitch attached to a subhuman host who called herself their mother. "It wouldn't hurt to smile, a-hole," Dylan shoved him playfully. Joe glanced at his bandmates who were waiting for his reaction. These guys were his family. He would do anything for them. They deserved this as much as he did. Maybe it was time to stop looking down and let himself enjoy the view at the top for once. A smile spread across his lips, and it felt good, damn good. Excitement exploded inside him. He grabbed Dylan into another hug, lifting him off the ground. "Fuck yeah!" The room came alive as Tyler and Moxley joined them in the group hug. Joe motioned for Davidson to join them, and he did, adding another cheering layer. So many emotions filled the room. Joe was on top of the world, and he wasn't looking back. The celebration continued as they piled into the elevator, making their way to the parking garage. Moxley whipped out his cell phone. Joe knew exactly who he was calling. "Hey, baby," Moxley smiled. "Guess what?" The screams on the other end of the cell echoed through the elevator. Joe was happy for him, and to be honest, a little jealous. He had almost everything Mox had, except for the one thing that made all the difference: a beautiful wife to share the news with. "We need to celebrate," Tyler said. "Beer's at my place." "And women," Dylan added. "I'll make some calls," Tyler winked, as he pulled his phone from his back pocket. No parties. Joe broke up the soiree before it had started. We have to be on the bus in 4 days, not hungover. Dylan put his arm around him. Live a little, bro. We can sleep it off in the bus. That's if you make it to the bus. Their parties always started out as innocent drunken shenanigans that escalated into blitz-out chaos, leaving Joe to pick up the pieces the next day and herd their hungover zombie asses to their next gig. Their shit got old. Joe's right. Moxley shoved his phone in his leather jacket pocket. We can't mess this up. Their first stop was at Dylan and Tyler's floor. Don't worry, mother hen. Dylan backed out of the elevator as the doors opened. We'll be there on time. The silver doors began to slide shut as little bro pounded his fists together, then gave Joe and Moxley double middle fingers. He's your brother, man. Mox shook his head. Joe snickered. Yup, no changing that. The elevator stopped on the next floor. He and Mox got out and made their way to their cars. Being back home in California brought back some amazing memories, and some not so good ones. He may not have a wife, but there was someone special, someone he wanted to share their amazing news with. But it was complicated. So, how do you do it, man? Joe shoved his hands in his front pockets of his Levi's. How do you keep it all together? Mox leaned against his black Toyota Tacoma bumper and pulled a pack of Marlboro Reds from his jacket. He lit one up. The dude was old school cool, with his super stylish pompadour mullet style. Joe had never met anyone more easygoing and loyal than Mox. Phone sex. Mox took a long drag from his cigarette, leaned back, and exhaled. What? Joe coughed incredulously. Yup, Mox repeated dryly, squinting as he took another drag. Then he winked at Joe. FaceTime is a game changer. Seriously? That's all it took? Hell yeah, he can get into that kind of kink, especially with Mel. I'm serious, though. How do you do it? I'm not joking. His bandmate ran his hand through his jet black hair. Why do you think I don't hang out after shows? I hightailed back up to the bus to call my girl. He gave his friend a raised brow. Too much information. Mox took another drag. Listen, Joe, there's a lot of temptation out there, and it's only going to get worse. You have to have a good head on your shoulders. Find a woman who'll keep you grounded. It's the only way to keep your sanity in our crazy world. I'm not so sure it's fair to bring someone like that into our world. Joe sat down next to Mox on the rear bumper. His childhood best friend, Melody Sterling, had been on his mind ever since his plane had landed at LAX the night before. At 13, he'd been the kid from the wrong side of town. 11-year-old Mel had been rock and roll royalty, the only daughter of the god of thunder, Leo Sterling. The second best thing that had ever happened to him had been answering a small ad in Drumbeat magazine. Played to perfection, high energy, cheaper than Ritalin. Leo Sterling's Drum Like a Pro lessons. The only thing that topped that, the only thing that ever could, was having Mel for a best friend. Moxley flicked his cigarette to the ground, then stubbed it out with the bottom of his boot. Call her. He didn't have to mention Melody's name. Mox knew Joe had been thinking about her. Their FaceTime calls had stopped. Their lives were busy. He'd been in New York promoting Gracefall's third album. She'd been absorbed in cello auditions for the Los Angeles Orchestra. He understood how important it was to her, but damn, he missed her. Especially her smile. He missed the phone calls where they'd stayed up late, talking and giving each other advice. There was never a time when Mel wasn't in his life. So 2 weeks without talking wasn't flying with him. You're right. He took his phone out. I'll call her. She'll want to know the good news. Right, Moxley scoffed. What? Joe walked over to the driver's side of his Jeep, pausing before getting in. As long as you tell her at a fancy restaurant over filet mignon, Mox said sarcastically as he opened the door to his truck and slid in. Joe flashed Mox the peace sign as he climbed into the driver's seat. He snickered. That wouldn't be awkward at all. He'd be crossing the friends to lovers line, a line Mel and he had protected throughout the years. They cherished their friendship and had never toyed with being more than friends. But something had changed for him. There wasn't any other woman he could picture spending the rest of his life with. But Melody, he could. She was home. He punched in the security code, unlocking his phone. Taking in a deep breath, he brought up his favorites list, and first on the list was Melody Sterling. He tapped on the mobile icon and waited for it to ring. His heart raced, which was ridiculous. He shouldn't be nervous. He'd called Mel thousands of times. Today was no different. At least, that's what he told himself. Hello? With the music thumping in the background, he didn't recognize the voice. Hey, this is Joe. Is Mel around? Oh, thank God you called, the woman shouted over the noise, sounding distressed. Danny? Is that you? He struggled to make out her voice. Yeah, are you in town? Yeah. The background noise muffled like she'd covered the phone. Don't do it, Mel! Joe's heart nosedived straight into his stomach. Do what? He exclaimed. Is Mel in trouble? What's going on? She's had a really shitty day. 3 mind erasers later, and she's out of control. She's threatening to dance on the table. Fuck. He revved up the Jeep and slammed it in reverse. Where are you? His tires squealed around every turn as he worked his way out of the parking garage. Dragon's Brew on the Strip. Sunset Strip was a good 30 minutes from where he was, not counting traffic. I'm on my way. Hurry, she's lost her damn mind. Just keep her off the table, okay? I'm not promising anything. I've never seen her like this. Please hurry. The phone went silent as his Jeep shot out of the garage, barely missing a pedestrian. The stop-and-go traffic through the city drove him crazy. He couldn't get to the bar fast enough. Mel? Drunk? This wasn't like her at all. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard. It was only 6 o'clock at night. Whatever it was couldn't be that bad. Chapter 2. Holding a wonderfully tall and, mostly importantly, cold glass of amber ale, Melody sashayed. Watch it. Okay, maybe sashaying was a little too complicated. Sorry. She apologized as she steadied herself, and the amber ale and heel-toed it back to the table where Danny sat. It's so hot in here. She held the cold glass up to her cheek before taking another satisfying gulp. Who called? Joe. Danny crossed her arms, making it known she wasn't happy with her. Oh my God. Melody slammed the glass down and grabbed her cell. Joe? She yelled into the phone. He already hung up. Danny rolled her eyes. Did he say he was in town? She sat in the bar stool across from Danny. He is. A huge smile stretched across her lips. It had been so long since she'd seen him. I should call him back. She squinted, trying to make out the numbers on her phone. Everything was a blur. She should have stopped at the second mind eraser. Danny took her cell. You'll see him soon enough. She tipped her chin towards the glass. Where did you get that? I almost forgot, Melody snorted. See those guys sitting at the bar? She glanced over her shoulder, giving them a flirty wave. Stop that. Danny grabbed her arm. You don't know those guys. Shrugging, she picked up the beer to take another sip. Her friend was really killing her buzz. And don't drink that. Danny took the glass away, and beer sloshed over the brim. They could have slipped something in it. She leaned back and set the glass down on the table behind her. Melody inched forward and lowered her voice. Like drugs? She mocked, laughing. I'm serious. Guys that hang out in bars are always up to no good. Drunk women are easy prey. Danny was amazingly gorgeous, with long dark hair, crystal blue eyes, and olive skin. With those striking features, she'd never been lonely for very long. During Melody's freshman year at UCLA, she'd met Danny, and they'd been friends ever since. Danny was like the sister she never had. They had a lot in common. They both had famous parents. Because of this, they understood the ups and downs of living in the limelight. Sometimes it wasn't a glowing experience, especially when the media had the tools to destroy a person's reputation. That year, Melody's family had been under attack by the media over a situation blown out of proportion. It had been reported that legendary drummer, Leo Sterling, had called the police on his estranged ex-wife. Apparently, she had shown up drunk at his estate, punched him in the face for writing a chapter in his tell-all rock star biography, Leo Sterling, the God of Thunder, which she claimed was the groupie that had never left. It was all a misunderstanding. Dirty laundry was something normal families could handle without paparazzi, but since hers was in the limelight, it was all hung out for everyone to see. The truth was that the chapter in her father's book wasn't about his ex-wife. Leo got a black eye that night, and the police were called by a maid who didn't understand the commotion going on. Her mother wasn't charged with assault. She was an alcoholic, so she went back to rehab. Through it all, Danny had been there, a true friend, helping her put everything into perspective. Melody held her friend's hand from across the table. That's why you're here, to keep me out of trouble. Mel, I have never seen you this drunk before. Taking a drink from a stranger? She shook her head. You have no street smarts. And why would she? Being the daughter of a legendary rock and roll drummer, her school of hard knocks was in a different discipline altogether. Her family lived the rock star lifestyle, and it had torn her mother and father apart. Her mother lived the life of a musician's wife, and it was hard for her to compete with other women, whiskey, and rock and roll. Her father loved to perform his music. Nothing would change that. Hope you enjoyed the chapter reading. That's all for today. Have a good night.